What's your birth name?
What is my
Birth name.
my name of birth? It is Felix Rohatyn. I had the opportunity of changing my name when I became a citizen, but I thought I might as well keep the name I've had.
That's a good choice. So what year were you born?
1928.
Okay, and where were you born?
Well, I think I was born in Vienna, but you know, there was so much confusion everywhere. But as far as I'm concerned, I was born in Vienna, Austria.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your experience growing up. What do you remember? If you were born in Vienna, or did you grow up in Vienna? Did you move around Europe? How were your first years?
No, you know, this is a long way off, and my memory doesn't go that far. But as far as I can remember, I was brought up in a well-to-do family. My father ran a beer brewery. My mother was a very beautiful woman, and so I remember these early years vaguely, and then we went to Romania, to Czernovic, where my father also managed a beer brewery. And I remember that, of course, by then I was 2 or 3 or whatever. We had a big dog, and a nanny. And then by about 1930, 34, 35, things began to get unpleasant in Central Europe, especially for Jews. And I guess my father decided that Romania was not terribly attractive either. And we moved to France, where again he managed a brewery near Orléans. And that's where we stayed until about 1935, 36. Things started getting really bad for Jews in various ways, in various places. But in the meantime, my parents divorced, and I forget, it was 36 or something. And they sent me off to a boarding school in Switzerland, which I didn't like. But I stayed in that boarding school, not very long actually, and by that time my mother had remarried, and I lived with my mother and my stepfather in Paris. I guess beginning of 1937 or 30, something like that. And I remember sort of vaguely, of course, there was a lot of angst, there was a lot of fear, because of Hitler, because of his speeches, of what he clearly wanted to destroy all possible Jews and take over Czechoslovakia, Austria. And I remember, of course, when they went into Austria, the people were terribly excited. They thought this was all wonderful. And hundreds of thousands of Austrians lining the road, shouting "Heil Hitler." That was a sobering thing. So then the war started in 1939, and everybody thought that France has the biggest army, that it would do well. And the French army collapsed in May 1940. To some extent also did the British army. And for the next couple of years it looked as if the Germans were really going to take over. luckily, their airplanes won the war. Won the war then. The RAF and the Navy and the British Navy. We were kind of stuck in Paris. My stepfather was in a camp for foreign servicemen, and but the German army was coming down on Paris, and we kept hearing them on their loudspeakers and on the noise of the tanks. But my mother decided that we just couldn't stay in Paris, even if we didn't know where my stepfather was, or where my father was, as a matter of fact. So she got our cook and took our car and put some mattresses on the roof of the car, and we started driving south. Because we wanted to actually get into Spain if we could. And it was quite a thing, because the roads were just jammed with cars and with trucks and with everything else, and German planes were going over. That was kind of a scary thing. But we kept on going. We got gasoline coupons on the black market in order to be able to continue. And finally, after 2 or 3 days like this, we got to the Spanish border. And the Spanish border was closed. We couldn't get into Spain. So we thought the only way we could get in would be to walk over the mountains. And my grandmother, who was with us, was 80 years old or something, couldn't walk over the mountains. So we turned around and started looking for back roads, forest roads and stuff like that. And we went back through Biarritz in order to try to cut across France and go to Marseille or to Cannes or whatever. Now, we were very nervous, obviously, because we didn't have any travel papers. And the Germans were beginning to take over the country. Maréchal Pétain gave up and surrendered France. And there we were in this car with my mother and my step-grandmother. And we kind of knew that if the Germans stopped us, obviously they would arrest us because we had no papers. But we kept driving in this forest, and we thought we were pretty lucky because the Germans didn't seem to be there. So. But finally, all of a sudden, we saw the road was closed because there was a big line of cars waiting for something. And it turned out that they were waiting because there was a German soldier who was checking passports and papers. And it was pretty clear that if we stopped because of this German, we were never going to get back up again. So we kept sort of getting closer and closer to this German. And my mother was watching what the other people were doing, and they were all waving their papers. So she got her driver's license out of her handbag and sort of waved it to the soldier who was lighting a cigarette. And of course he couldn't do both at the same time. So he waved us through, and we started driving off again. And I looked back, and the soldier was checking the next person's papers. But that was kind of a close thing. And then we went to Marseille, we went to Cannes, and in Cannes we rented an apartment, I think, or something, and my stepfather went down to meet us there. I don't quite know how he found us, but he did. And we couldn't get into Spain because of the border, but we knew we really should get out of France. And by that time, the Italians were coming into, the Italian army was taking over the southern part of France. And somehow, and I don't know how, and I really would like to know how, my stepfather, who had come down from, he was in Brittany, in this camp, escaped with two of his colleagues. And somehow got visas to get us into Brazil.
So you don't know how they met?
I do not know. No, I do not know. They were diplomatic visas. I don't know how we got those. I mean, it's clear that somebody had to be in touch with the Brazilian authorities to get the visas.
Have you ever heard your mother and stepfather talking about it?
No. Also, after, you know, we came up to the United States after we left Brazil. And this was all chaotic, and we had some other friends whom we ran into on the boat going to Brazil. And then before that, they were going to, I think, to Cuba, and we were going to Brazil. And then after we came to the United States, which was in 1940, 41, something like that. I was going to school in Rio, and we were waiting for our visas to go to the United States under the quota, with the Polish quota, I think. And we finally got to the United States in 1943, 44, something like that. And after another couple of years of staying in New York, my family decided to go back to Europe, and I still don't quite know how this all happened, but we did have visas to go to the United States.
So do you remember the trip, the boat trip to Brazil?
From Lisbon?
So we were in France.
We were in France.
We were in France. So how did you get to Lisbon?
We got to Lisbon by going to North Africa, and we went to Casablanca. We first to Oran and then to Casablanca, and we waited to get a visa to go to Lisbon, to go to Portugal. So that's when we also ran into our friends who were going on another boat, and they were going to Cuba, and we were going to wherever we could go. But we had the visas now to go to Brazil. Otherwise, we couldn't have gone to Lisbon because they wouldn't have let us in. And we didn't really know whether this was a real visa because it seemed like such a miraculous thing.
Have you met any other person at the time, or maybe your parents, and maybe you heard something that had a similar visa your?
Well, I think these friends of ours, the Leo Castelli and his family, they were going to Cuba. They must have had a similar visa of, maybe not to Brazil, but to Cuba. They were very good friends of ours, and he became a very, very famous art dealer. So this must be 1946, 1947. This was, and my parents came back to Europe. And I didn't want to come back here. I wanted to go to college in the States. And I did. I went to a small college in Vermont and became a U.S. citizen. And right after I became a U.S. citizen, I was drafted for the Army because of the Korean War. So I thought, my God, what have I done here? But in any case, it was a good thing. It was a very difficult war. And after I finished with the Army and I finished with college, I decided I had to look for a job. I just wanted to do something. And my stepfather knew Andre Meyer, who was the senior partner of Lazard Frere, and said to him, listen, I have this stepson who isn't very bright, and could you give him a job for a year or something? So I said, okay. And I went to work at Lazard in New York. And I worked there for 40 years.
So all this time your mother and stepfather were back in Europe?
Yes.
Did they settle in France?
Yes,
or?
yes. They lived, because we lived in France before. We lived in Paris, so.
So you were an ambassador in France. How was going back?
Well, it was, I was going back 50 years or 45 years or whatever. It was very, very interesting. It was very, 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 very good experience for us, for my wife, for myself. We were treated extremely well. Even though in France there were some bad things that happened. And obviously you can't say that either that all French people were good or that all French people were bad. I mean, it was a very difficult time. But I thought, for a young man who had just his brain, if one could get a job someplace, it would be a good thing to do.
So going back to Brazil, you were in Lisbon and there you took a boat to Brazil. How much time did you spend in Brazil? Do you remember?
I think about a year or something like that. I went to the French Brazil, to the Liceo Franco Brasileiro. I think that was in Rio already, but in Lisbon there was a British school of some kind.
How is your Portuguese?
Terrible, it's gone. I wish I hadn't, but you can't keep a language, when you. I kept my German reasonably well and my French very well, but unfortunately the Portuguese was beyond my capabilities.
Do you have any memories from Brazil and Rio?
Well, I have memories, of going to school by riding on the side of the tramway and going to the soccer matches. And then we went to Teresópolis in the summer or something. I had an uncle and an aunt who lived in Buenos Aires, so we visited with them, and we then we went, my family, I mean, my father was still in France.
Did you hear, I was actually thinking about him, did you hear back from your father what happened to him?
Oh, yes, he was hiding with near Orléans, where he had worked. I believe with a man who was delivering the barrels to the factory where you put and he was there for 4 years, which was quite miraculous.
Did you meet him after the war?
Yes, I did meet him, yes. And then he died very soon after that.
So, once you were back in Brazil, did you hear anything about Sousa Dantas? There was any comment, like any rumors about what he was doing?
Well, we got to Brazil from Lisbon, and we stayed there for 8 months, 9 months, and then we went to the States. So we weren't really there for a very, very significant time, and we lived in Copacabana, and I went to the beach, and while we were there, we tried to figure out what was happening in Europe. But we still, we had decided we were going to try to get to the States, and we did. And then when my mother and stepfather went back to Europe, I went to a small university up north and stayed and studied there for 3 or 4 years before going into the army and then going to work.
So how did you first hear the story of Sousa Dantas? When were you?
I had a phone call from the gentleman from the Wallenberg Foundation, Mr. not Chrysostomo, but something like that.
Joao Chrysostomo.
Yeah. And he wanted to know if I would be interested in seeing some of these papers, and I said, of course, anything that puts a little light on this. And he came to see me, and we had a little ceremony downtown.
So what was your your reaction, your impression when you learned that you got these papers thanks to this diplomat, and that he was actually doing this for other people?
Yes, listen, I mean, we were terribly grateful for what he did. I know that he took personal danger because I think Getúlio Vargas was not a great friend of the Jews. And these people were taking risks. And Sousa Dantas suffered quite a lot. As I guess did his colleague from Portugal, no?
Sousa Mendes.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
We never met them because I think they were dead both. I'm not sure, but we obviously were very, very grateful, and we looked on the list of that in the book to see if there was anybody else that we knew.
Did you? No?
Yes, the Castelli. That was kind of astounding. So that was about the story.
So do you think there is anything else that could be done to better recognize what Sousa Dantas?
Well, there was a young American at that time named Varian Fry. And I always thought that ultimately, one way or another, it was Varian Fry who somehow got us the visas or something, because he did wonderful things. And of course, he was already dead when he died in 1965 or 6 or something like that. But that was the only explanation I had, because why would anybody how would my stepfather, for instance, know that he should go to the Brazilian embassy because Mr. Susadantas had gotten permission to give out 800 visas? There was no way. So somebody had to do that. And it was sheer luck. It was sheer luck. We drove down there. And so I still think somebody had to point the finger and say, you should go over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that these things were known within, I don't know, did you grow up in a Jewish community, or was your upbringing a Jewish or religious one?
No, it wasn't, no.
But like from my previous experience doing interviews with, I did a lot of interviews with people saved by Raoul Wallenberg,
Mm-hmm.
which is a similar story, but
Yeah.
happened in Hungary.
Yes.
And mostly everybody was saying that they would just, tell each other
Yes.
about this person who was giving these documents, and everybody
Yeah.
would know somehow, or, the rumor would spread.
Yeah.
That's how.
Well, I remember at some part in this thing, we were going to try again to get into Spain, and we had very little money with us. But we had my mother and my stepfather had a collection of gold coins, and so we were going to try to get over the border, and we wanted to hide these gold coins, and I had to put them in toothpaste tubes. So I undid all of these toothpaste things. But the next day we couldn't get across the border anyway, so we just kept the gold coins. Lived off these gold coins for quite a long time.
Yeah, I was wondering, you had the oil stamps, and then you had the gold coins, and
Yeah.
how did you manage to get food, or was all your mom?
I guess it was my mom, yes.
Yeah, she was very brave, I'm sure.
Oh yes, she certainly was.
Mhm. So, you mentioned one of the events that was done to honor Sousa Dantas downtown a
Yes.
while ago, and we had a video from that event, and you mentioned. Let me read it, because you mentioned there is a quote that is beautiful, and I just wanted to repeat it. You said, "If I hadn't gotten those visas, I would have seen the gas chambers in Auschwitz. I waited 50 years of my life to know how I got my visa. Now I know." And I thought it was, in a way, that short quote summarized.
Well, it was true. It was true. I still don't know. In fact, I thought I would go to Brazil one day and I'd go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and ask to look through there. It must be there. I mean, it has to be.
Yeah, there must be. I know that Fabio Koifman, doing the research for
Yeah.
his book, went through a lot of papers, and that's how he managed to put together the book. But
Yeah.
I'm sure there are still so many other things to uncover.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure it has to do also with Varian Fry, because he was a young man. He got to Marseille with $500 or something like that. He was 22 years old, and he put together a ring of people. They did some extraordinary things.
Is there any other thing that you would like to share with me?
No, we just were extraordinarily lucky in all of this, and thankful, because most of the other people died.
Yeah. No, yeah. When I hear these stories, it's a combination of luck, bravery, courage. Being in the right place, the right moment.
Mostly luck, though.
Yeah.
I saw the other day they had found there was some correspondence of Anne. I forget, but there was some mail between the father of a girl who was in a camp and the girl. Well, I hope
Did you have any correspondence with your father when he was
No.
away?
No, no. But I went to see him right afterwards. I went to see him in 47, 46, 47.
Okay.
Well, thank you for coming over.
Thanks, to you for your time.
That's
Great. Thank you.